On an ordinary morning in Whitehaven, people walk past a familiar coal mine chimney. It stands tall, weathered, and silent. They have seen it for so many years that no one stops to ask where it really leads. This chimney is known as a candlestick, a ventilation structure once common in coal mines of the era. At first glance, there is nothing unusual about it. But in Whitehaven, this candlestick does not mark the end of a mine. It is almost the beginning. Beneath it runs a single tunnel known as the Main Road, stretching more than 6 miles beneath the seabed of the Irish Sea. Every day, hundreds of men, and even boys, entered that tunnel believing they would return the same way they came. What no one paid attention to was this: along those 6 miles, there was no second way out. The tragedy here would not come from the sea rushing in, as many might assume. It would come from the moment that single road was cut off. So why would an entire town accept a livelihood built on a place where one small mistake meant there was no way back? To understand the answer, you'll need to stay with this story to the very end. And if you're drawn to documentaries that uncover the real disasters hidden behind ordinary places, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. Whitehaven and the normalization of danger. At the turn of the 20th century, Whitehaven was a town sustained by coal. Ships moved through its harbor, neighborhoods grew around the pits, and entire families depended on a single reality: work underground. Here, coal was more than a resource. It was a livelihood, a tradition, and the reason the town existed at all. Nearly every household had someone who worked in the mines, if not a father, then a brother, an uncle, or the eldest son. Wellington Pit was a familiar name, spoken without hesitation or fear. It was not considered more dangerous than any other mine. It was simply where people went to work, and where they expected to return from at the end of each shift. At the time, the mine employed both adult men and teenage boys. Labor laws in the early 20th century allowed this, so long as the work was considered necessary and established by precedent. For many families, sending a boy into the mine was not unusual. It was how skills were learned, endurance was built, and survival in Whitehaven began. Wellington Pit operated on a large scale. 723 workers were divided into 3 rotating shifts, keeping the mine active around the clock. As one shift ended, another was already descending. The mine never slept, and in many ways, neither did the town. Its layout consisted of a main artery known as the Main Road, with secondary tunnels branching outward to reach the surrounding coal seams. To manage this complex underground space, the mine was divided into separate working zones, known as districts, including District 5 and District 6. Each had its own crews, routines, and responsibilities. Most miners were familiar with only a small portion of the system and trusted that the rest was being managed by others elsewhere underground. Ventilation was considered one of the mine's strengths. A massive fan, 24 feet in diameter, rotated 126 times per minute, continuously forcing air through the tunnels. With the mine reaching nearly 1,000 feet deep and stretching horizontally for miles, airflow was not a convenience, it was a necessity. Engineers were aware of the risks posed by having only a single route in and out of the mine. A second escape route had been recommended within the industry, but it was not mandatory. The cost was high, the terrain difficult, and years of uninterrupted operation suggested the existing design was sufficient. On paper, the system remained within acceptable limits. Over time, danger became routine. Miners grew accustomed to the noise, the darkness, and the sense of enclosure beneath the earth. Each uneventful day reinforced the belief that the system, while imperfect, was stable. That belief obscured a simple truth: when there is only one way out, there is no margin for error. Danger did not kill them immediately. What killed them was living with danger for too long. So when everything still appeared to be functioning as it always had, What was it that finally broke the balance in a single night? The night of May 11th, 1910. The first signs. The night shift began on the evening of May 11th, 1910, like countless others at Wellington Pit. Underground, everything followed its familiar rhythm. Lamps were lit. Tools struck stone. Crews spread out to their assigned sections, continuing work they had performed hundreds of times before. Sometime between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, an unfamiliar sound echoed through the mine. It was not sharp or sudden. It was heavy, low and slow, rolling through the tunnels like thunder trapped beneath the earth. Joe Kenmore, working alongside two other miners, immediately sensed that something was wrong. Noise was constant in a coal mine, falling rock, metal against metal, drills cutting into the walls, but this sound did not belong to any of those. It did not follow the rhythm of human labor. It did not repeat in a predictable way, and because of that, their first instinct was not to keep working, but to stop. The three men left their work area and moved toward the main road. From a distance, they could see a cloud of dust hanging in the tunnel. Its source was unclear, its scale uncertain. They tried approaching from different routes, but the closer they came, the warmer the air grew, and the smell of smoke began to appear. It was not yet a situation that demanded flight. But it was no longer a normal shift. At the same time, in another section of the mine, Jack Ware was working with a crew of 24 men. With years of experience underground, Jack noticed nothing out of the ordinary until his teenage son spoke up. The boy was the first in the group to react to the sound, and his unease was enough to draw his father's attention. Jack gathered his crew and led them toward the main road. When they reached the junction between District 5 and District 6, the two groups met. No one had new information. There was no signal from the surface, no instruction from mine management, no order to retreat, and no direction to continue. They stood there, in a space where the air was still breathable, but where conditions were clearly changing. The sound did not return to normal. Dust continued to hang in the air. The smoke was not yet thick, but it was present. At that moment, there was no disaster. Only one undeniable fact. No one truly knew what was happening. In a coal mine, sometimes the most frightening thing is not what you can see, but what you can hear. When no one gives direction, do people wait, or do they try to find their own way out? Individual decisions, and the two who escaped. At the junction between District 5 and District 6, the miners stopped. Here, the air was still breathable. A flow of air from District 6 carried a temporary sense of safety. No one panicked, no one ran. In that moment, everything could still be considered under control. Time passed slowly. The unfamiliar sound did not disappear, but it also did not intensify enough to force an immediate retreat. There was no signal from the surface. No one came looking for them. And as they waited, their options quietly narrowed, without anyone fully realizing it. Jack Ware began to lose patience. With years of experience underground, he understood that waiting was not always the safest choice. In the absence of instructions, remaining where they were meant surrendering their fate to forces they could not see. Jack said he would try to escape on his own. It was not an order, not a call to action, just a decision made quietly. Among those present, only Joe Kenmore chose to go with him. The others stayed behind, in a place where the air could still be breathed. Jack and Joe covered their mouths with rags and moved into the thickening smoke ahead. Within a few steps, their lamps became useless. The light was swallowed almost immediately. They could not remain upright. Smoke and fire were rising above them, forcing them to crawl along the ground where traces of air still lingered. The heat increased rapidly. Every meter forward became harder than the last. They had to pass through several rock falls, navigating by memory and sensation rather than sight. In some sections, they could no longer tell exactly where they were, only that stopping meant they would not be able to continue. The journey lasted nearly an hour. When Jack and Joe finally crawled out of the mine, they were almost completely exhausted. Smoke and heat had severely damaged their lungs, but what stunned them was not the pain. It was what they saw next. Outside the pit, only the surface crew was present. No one else had escaped. No group followed behind them. In that moment, Jack and Joe understood that they had not only survived, but had crossed the final boundary. They reported what they had seen during their escape. Fire and smoke had blocked the main road. The single route out of the mine was no longer passable. That meant the men still inside had no direct way to escape. They didn't run, they crawled. Because in a coal mine, life stays close to the ground. With the only exit cut off, what fate awaited those still trapped inside the mine? Rescue, desperation, and human limits. After Jack Ware and Joe Kenmore made it out, the first search team was immediately sent into the mine. They advanced along the main road, the only remaining route. The deeper they went, the hotter the air became. Smoke thickened rapidly. When they reached a point roughly 80 yards from the fire, they were forced to stop. Heat and smoke had exceeded what the human body could endure. From what they could see, it was clear that the main road was completely blocked. There was no alternate route, no way around it. The single path out of the mine was no longer usable. News spread quickly through Whitehaven. Families of the trapped miners gathered at the pit through the night. The two main roads leading to the coastline became clogged with people waiting in silence. By the morning of May 12th, the number of survivors stood at just 7. Most of the remaining men were trapped more than 3 miles from the main shaft. Rescue teams continued to attempt entry, but each effort ended the same way. Smoke spread through the tunnel system. Carbon monoxide accumulated, making deeper access increasingly dangerous, even for brief periods. Later that afternoon, Chief Inspector of Mines J.B. Atkinson arrived at the scene. After receiving a briefing, he and the regional inspector descended into the mine to assess conditions firsthand. What they encountered confirmed what earlier rescue teams had already reported. Temperatures inside the tunnels were impossibly high. Smoke was dense and unrelenting. Brattice cloths, normally used to direct airflow and isolate fires, had become so hot they could not be touched. Even at a distance where the flames were still ahead, the heat was enough to cause burns. Sending more people into the mine would no longer be a rescue effort. It would be a certainty of injury or death. The decision was made to withdraw all rescue personnel. Outside, the reaction was immediate and intense. Miners and family members of those still trapped protested fiercely. Some had to be physically restrained to prevent them from entering the pit themselves, but conditions underground left no realistic alternative. Under mounting pressure from the community, a special rescue team from Ellswick was called in. They arrived with more advanced breathing apparatus, allowing them to operate for limited periods in toxic air. That night, the team entered Wellington Pit alongside inspectors and mine officials. They advanced nearly 3 miles down the main road before stopping to activate their breathing equipment. Visibility dropped to almost zero. Heat increased with every step. In some areas, metal components of their helmets became hot enough to deform. One man suffered burns simply from contact with fallen wires on the tunnel floor. When they were finally forced to turn back, there was no remaining doubt. Conditions beyond the fire could not support human life. Not because of a lack of effort, not because of hesitation, but because the limits of the human body had been reached. From that moment on, all realistic possibilities of rescue came to an end. Aftermath, final truths, and legacy. When all rescue efforts came to an end, Whitehaven did not return to normal. Nearly 3,000 miners from nearby towns gathered, demanding that the pit be reopened by any means necessary. They came without a plan. They came with hope. But underground, hope was no longer a deciding factor. To extinguish the fire, a final decision was made. Brick walls were built to seal off the tunnels leading into Wellington Pit, cutting off the oxygen feeding the flames. When the last bricks were set in place, the mine was officially sealed, not to protect property, but to stop something that could no longer be controlled. For months afterward, Wellington Pit stood abandoned. Each day, smoke continued to pour from its ventilation shafts, a reminder that what lay beneath the ground was not yet finished. Only when the fire was fully extinguished was the mine reopened, not to resume work, but for a different purpose. The recovery of the bodies began. What was found showed that many of the men trapped inside had survived for several hours after being cut off. Some were discovered holding one another. Some had written messages in chalk on steel doors. Others had removed their clothing and folded it neatly before collapsing. There were no signs of mass panic, only individual actions carried out in darkness when there was no longer a way out. In total, 136 men lost their lives. 85 women were left widowed. 260 children lost their fathers. During the process of identification, at least one victim was buried beneath the wrong headstone, a mistake that has never been fully resolved. The official investigation concluded that the cause was a methane gas explosion. 64 rescuers were awarded the King Edward Medal for bravery. Wellington Pit came to be recognized as one of the worst mining disasters in British history. Today, the mine is no longer in operation, but its memory remains in Whitehaven, in stories passed down, in families that never returned to what they once were, and in the way people began to look differently at systems that appeared, on the surface, to be functioning normally. The mine was dug beneath the sea. But what buried the miners was not water, it was human decisions. When a system is built to operate continuously, without a secondary way out, the question no longer belongs only to the past. Today, what systems are we living with where a single failure would leave no way back? If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.